Welcome back to the Constitutional Clarion. This video is being recorded on the King's Birthday holiday weekend in Sydney, Australia. Hopefully, I've been able to include at the beginning and the end of this video some snippets of the King's Birthday ceremony that was held at Government House in Sydney earlier this morning. For those of you who watched my video on the chain of command, we see an example of that today where the New South Wales Governor, Margaret Beazley, is currently the administrator of the Commonwealth of Australia because the Governor-General is overseas in France for the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. The Sydney ceremony, along with the compulsory bagpipes and parading and saluting and even a fly past, also includes a rather odd ceremony where the King becomes present amongst us through the raising of his standard, and then formally departs by the lowering of the standard. One year there was great consternation when someone forgot to lower the flag and the King's presence lingered longer than was intended. This year, however, it all went to order, except for the fact that the grounds were a bit of a quagmire due to all the recent rain we've had here in Sydney. So the horses were confined to only 3 of them, and they kept on the driveway while all the poor cadets were out there marching through the mud. The Governor also nearly lost her shoe as she went out to inspect the cadets in the mud, but she did manage to maintain her vice-regal bearing and her footwear. Women are at a distinct disadvantage when inspecting troops in parade ground soup, as we have discovered. Of course, it's not the King's real birthday, which is in November. But given that, historically, the King has 2 bodies, his physical body and his body politic, one of which can die and the other of which continues in perpetuity, it's probably unsurprising that he can also have a birthday that attaches to his constitutional office as king, as well as one that attaches to him as a human being. Indeed, he has quite a lot of official birthdays, as they're celebrated on different days in different realms, and indeed in different states within Australia on different dates, particularly in Queensland and Western Australia, who have opted for different dates to the rest of the country. Most countries choose May or June, as this is a better time for outdoor parades in the Northern Hemisphere. In Australia, it's a bit more mysterious as to why we stick with June, other than it being now regarded as the traditional start of the ski season, although frankly it hasn't really lived up to a ski season this year. If you think it odd that Australia celebrates the King's birthday, then other countries go even further. For example, in Tuvalu, they actually have an heir to the throne's birthday holiday celebration. Some countries indeed have become so attached to their holiday that it's quite hard to give up. So in Fiji, the Queen's birthday holiday was celebrated long after Fiji became a republic in 1987, and they only ended the celebration of the Queen's birthday in 2012. But this video is not actually about imaginary birthdays. It's actually about a rather peculiar dispute which arises from time to time in Australia about who is the head of state of Australia. Well, what does the Constitution say? You might well ask. Well, I'm glad you did. Actually, the Constitution doesn't make any mention of the term head of state at all. It does, however, refer throughout the Constitution to the Queen, who was Queen Victoria at the time the Constitution was enacted. But for the purposes of this video, I'm actually going to use the term sovereign to cover both kings and reigning queens, just to avoid confusion and having to swap from one to another all the time. Now, the Constitution, of course, also refers to the Governor-General and indeed to the governors of each of the Australian states. To determine who is the head of state, one must first look to, well, what does that term actually mean? It is usually defined as the person who holds the highest ranking constitutional office in a country, in whom executive power is vested, at least formally, and to whom an oath of allegiance is commonly made. In Australia, that person is the sovereign. Section 2 of the Constitution provides that the Governor-General shall be the sovereign's representative in the Commonwealth. Section 61 vests the executive power of the Commonwealth in the sovereign, but makes it then exercisable by the Governor-General as the sovereign's representative. Members of Parliament swear an oath to the sovereign, not the Governor-General. As the former Governor-General, Sir Paul Hasluck, noted, the reason why the oath is taken to the sovereign rather than the Governor-General is that the sovereign is the head of state. From a logical and a legal point of view, the Governor-General does not hold the highest ranking constitutional office in the country because he or she is a representative of someone who holds a higher office. Those realms that have more recent constitutions, such as Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands and Tuvalu, state expressly in their constitutions that the sovereign is the head of state. In the older realms, such as Australia and Canada, this is not explicit, but it has always been understood to be the case. As Sir William Dale stated, quote, "In a country of which the Queen is sovereign, she is head of state," unquote. New Zealand made this explicit in its Constitution Act of 1986, providing in Section 2 that the sovereign in right of New Zealand is the head of state of New Zealand. Some complained at the time that this was a tautology, as a sovereign is by definition the head of state. So why is this even an issue in Australia at all? The reason goes back to the 1999 Republic referendum campaign. At that time, one group of monarchists, Australians for Constitutional Monarchy, decided that the best way of blunting the argument about the need to have an Australian as head of state was to declare that, hurrah, we already have an Australian as the head of state because the Governor-General is the head of state. Now, I should say that another group of monarchists, the Australian Monarchist League, was vehemently opposed to this particular argument, seeing it as an insult to the monarch. Nonetheless, the argument spread, and this has caused general confusion on the issue in Australia. On the 6th of January 1999, the Governor-General, Sir William Deane, wrote to the Queen about this particular argument that the Governor-General is the head of state, noting that he, the Governor-General, strongly disagreed with this argument, but said that it was being determinedly propagated by a number of people within Australia. The Queen's private secretary responded on the 13th of January, noting that in his view, the argument was one of convenience, which would not really hold constitutional water. For a while, the palace was to some extent complicit in its spread by removing from its website the statement that the Queen was head of state of Australia. But interestingly, once the 1999 Republic referendum failed, that website was revised and it reasserted that the Queen was head of state of the United Kingdom and 15 other Commonwealth realms. Well, what's the basis for this claim that it's the Governor-General who's the head of state? While the argument was sourced in political convenience, it did contain a kernel of truth. That is, that most of the exercises of sovereign power in Australia are performed by the Governor-General in his or her own right. It's the Governor-General, not the sovereign, who can summon, prorogue and dissolve Parliament, who can appoint the Prime Minister or even dismiss the Prime Minister. On this basis, it is argued that the Governor-General is the head of state because he or she is the one who exercises the head of state's powers. Now, this is true up to a point. It's certainly arguable that the Governor-General is the de facto head of state. But as a matter of form, and in the case of these kinds of titles, form is important, it is the sovereign who is the head of state, and the Governor-General is his or her representative at the Commonwealth level of government. Critically, the Governor-General's powers do not extend to all the Australian states, unlike the case in Canada. State governors are the representatives directly of the sovereign in each of the states, and they are not subordinate in any way to the Governor-General. Hence, it's the sovereign who is the head of state of the nation of Australia as a whole, whereas the Governor-General's powers are limited to the Commonwealth level of government. In terms of formal recognition, it's the sovereign who is recognised nationally and internationally as Australia's head of state. For example, the British government's Cabinet Manual notes that the sovereign, King Charles III, is not only head of state of the United Kingdom, but also of his other realms, including Australia. The United Nations, for example, also recognised Queen Elizabeth II when she spoke at the United Nations as Australia's head of state. The Australian government also declares that the sovereign is Australia's head of state. For example, on its web page called Introduction to Australia and its System of Government, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade declares that, quote, Australia's head of state is the King of Australia, His Majesty King Charles III. The Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet also declares on its website that the King is head of state of the United Kingdom and 14 other Commonwealth realms, including Australia. Upon the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, stated that, quote, today we mark formally the new head of state in King Charles III. There are still some monarchists in Australia who, fearing a new Republican push, maintain the argument that the Governor-General is Australia's head of state. In contrast, in Canada, such an argument is anathema to monarchists. Back in 1978, the former Trudeau government proposed a bill that would have effectively made the Governor-General head of state of Canada instead of the Queen, with the Governor-General becoming a constituent part of Parliament and with the Queen's powers being transferred to the Governor-General. The bill was criticised by monarchists, but also by federalists who saw it as a means of provincial subordination. They did not wish to see a federal officer assume the role of head of state. The palace, too, did not want to see the Governor-General displace the Queen as head of state. The Queen was apparently heavily involved in negotiations and fought a rearguard action against this proposed legislation, and she won. The bill did not proceed. In 2009, there was another furore in Canada when the Canadian Governor-General asserted that she was the head of state because of letters patent from 1947, which had conferred the capacity on the Governor-General to exercise the sovereign's powers. The Canadian Prime Minister at the time, Stephen Harper, intervened, asserting that Queen Elizabeth II was Canada's head of state, not the Governor-General. In short, the position is that the head of state of Australia is the sovereign, King Charles III, while in practice, the Governor-General exercises most of the sovereign powers in relation to Australia, while still remaining a representative of the sovereign. Although it's an odd arrangement, it's no more odd than celebrating the sovereign's birthday on a day that actually isn't his birthday. Thank you for watching the Constitutional Clarion on this King's Birthday holiday weekend, and I look forward to seeing you next time when I promise I will move back to core, non-royal constitutional issues. And I look forward to seeing you then. Goodbye.
The lowering of the royal standard symbolises His Majesty's departure.